If you are interested in learning Revit API, then you need to understand Revit API documentation. There is no way around it, because we can't remember everything inside of it. But we should know how to find what we need when we need it. And that's the goal of this video. Hi, if you're new on the channel, my name is Eric Fritz, and I teach everything I know about Revit API and PyRevit here on YouTube, and also on my Learn Revit API course platform. I made more than 100 video tutorials about Revit API already, and I keep making more so you can learn Revit API much easier than it was for me. And now let's dive into documentation. But first, what kind of documentation should you use? There's an offline version of documentation which honestly I wouldn't recommend to anyone, so you can forget about it. And then there are two websites. There's RevitAPIDocs.com and then there is APIDocs.co. And both of them are made by GUI Tellerico, and they're pretty much the same thing. There are a few little differences here and there, but I'll mention them in the end of the video if you want to know about this. And now let's just open Revit API Docs full screen. I'm going to focus on the documentation. Alright, on this page you can see on the top you can select which Revit version you are using, or you can go straight to the search term and look at here. Also, you will notice that you can download the free ebook, The Beginner's Guide to Revit API, which I made. If you click here, you'll see that it was downloaded by more than 5,000 people, and I'm just going to briefly show you what's inside of it. Inside of it, you'll notice that there is a lot of pages. You'll learn what is Revit API, how to start with programming basics, set up Revit API development, how to read documentation, and so on. And you can read it yourself absolutely for free. For example, if I'm going to go to page 16, how to read documentation, in here, I've just made the written format about all the different points that you should know about Revit API documentation and where you should pay your attention. But for you, you don't need this chapter right now because I'm going to explain it everything in this video. Let's go back to documentation and continue. I'm going to select Revit version 2023 and we're just going to have a look around. First of all, you'll notice that there is an article, What's New in Revit API 2023. This is a document from Autodesk defining all the changes in 2023 and even some changes that might come in the next year if something is going to be disappearing. This is useful for people who already have a bunch of tools, and when new Revit API version comes out, they want to know if they need to make any changes or correct something in their code. If you're just a beginner, just completely ignore it, you don't need to know about the changes. Just start with whatever version you use, and slowly you will adapt it to other versions as well. Now, in here you can see a bunch of different namespaces. You will see here Autodesk Revit DB, and if you know anything about Revit API, this is the first import we always do. We write from Autodesk Revit DB import everything, or import wall, wall type, filtered element collector. This is where majority of classes that we need come from. But if you work in different disciplines, like for example architecture, electrical, maybe lighting, mechanical, plumbing, structure, you might want to import classes from other disciplines as well. For example, if I'm going to open architecture, you'll notice that there are different classes like fascia, gutter, there is railing, there is room, stairs, and these are architecture specific classes. And I know that sometimes people try to bring it from Autodesk Revit DB, and if they cannot bring, for example, class of stairs, they think that class of stairs doesn't exist. This way, you know that you can actually find it in others as well. And you don't have to go for them specifically. You can just use the search on the top. You'll see, oh, there's a stair class. You open it, and you'll notice right here, where does it come from? It comes from Autodesk Revit DB architecture. What if you're gonna look for the object type? In this case, I can see enumeration on the bottom. You'll see that this one is coming from Autodesk Revit UI selection, and so on. Now, let's find a class like a wall, and we can start with the basics. Here's what you can see inside of Revit API documentation. On the left side, you have a sidebar where you can open and have a look inside. There are members, and members is just going to include everything else. It's going to include all the methods and all the properties. I'm going to cover them in a second, but first, when you click on the class, you're going to get information about the class itself. Right here, you're going to have the name, this one where it comes from, the description. Then you have the syntax, and for the class, it's not much. Just gonna say that class of wall is based on a host object, so it inherits everything from there. And if you know anything about inheritance, you can scroll all the way down, you can see here the inheritance hierarchy. And here you can see that we are in the wall class, it's based on the host object, which based on the element, which based on the generic system object. I'm gonna cover inheritance hierarchy in a moment because I think it's quite important. But first, let's kind of finish with the basics. Now, you often will find remarks, and it's actually very useful because sometimes it's very obvious, like in this case, it's going to represent all kind of walls. But in more complicated classes, you can actually find a lot of useful information in remarks. It can warn you about certain errors that you might encounter. It can warn you about certain workflows that you need to do. I always recommend you to check remarks when you work with new classes. And if you're lucky enough, you're going to find examples. Unfortunately, they're not going to be in Python, but it's not a problem because it's not complicated to translate C# into Python. And nowadays, we can even use ChatGPT and it makes so much easier. Just going to write here, translate to Python. Don't add any imports or new variables. The last part I add so it doesn't try to fix the code because it's just a snippet and I want to get the translation. When you're just going to say translate to Python, oftentimes it tries to make all the imports, all the references, and all these things that you don't need right now. And now here's the result. You can see that there is the snippet that translated, and now it's much easier for you to read if you know Python. All right, let's close it and go back. We're not going to use this example anywhere. And now there's inheritance. There's a thing that you need to know about inheritance in programming. There's a concept called object-oriented programming, and it's all about working with different classes. I'm not gonna go deep in it, but I wanna explain inheritance. Because you see, we have a class of wall, right? I'm gonna open it and look at the properties. And you will see that here I have maybe like 12, 13 different properties. But on the right side, if I'm gonna scroll through, there are gonna be way more properties. And this is because on the left side, you can see only wall-specific properties. And then on the right side, you can also see properties and methods which are inherited from other classes. For example, this one is inherited from element, and I think everything here is from element. Let's look at another class like view plan. And for example, it's going to be exactly the same thing here. You will learn that we're in the view plan, and it's based on the view class, which we can open, which is based on the element class, which you can also open. And system object is just used as the kind of generic beginning of the class. All right, now we're gonna go and have a look in here. You can see we have only 2 properties for the view plans, but you'll notice that there are a bunch of different properties inherited from the view and also inherited from the element. And the reason it's done because, for example, if you're gonna look at the element class, this is a base class for most persistent data within Revit document. It means that nearly all documents in Revit, they need element ID, group ID, document, category, bounding box, level ID, name, and so on, so on, so on. This is kind of the generic where our elements start. And by inheriting this class, for example, view class inherits element class, it gets all the same properties and methods from the element class, unless they are overridden, but I don't think it's done in Revit API. You can read it here, what's inherited from element, what's inherited from anywhere else, and so on. This is why it's important, because sometimes when you look for different properties and methods, it's good to know where they come from. And it's also applicable if you're going to look inside of Revit. I'm just going to select some elements, go to Add-ins tab, and in RevitLookup, we're going to snoop selection. Inside of here, we have different elements selected. These 2 have a class of wall. This one has a class of family instance. I'm going to look at the wall. You can see right here it says element. Then you have different properties and methods. Then eventually you will see host object with 1 method and wall with wall-specific properties and method. So in here, if you need to find specifically wall properties and methods, you can scroll all the way down and skip all these kind of element properties and methods, which is going to be the same for all the elements. Another thing I want to point out is that the difference between RevitLookup and Revit documentation is in documentation, you can understand how to use different things, what they give you, and so on. But RevitLookup is great because you can see the real values. For example, in this wall, if I'm going to scroll all the way down, I can see that it uses the wall type with the name 1.1. The structural usage is bearing and so on, so you get the real values. While in documentation, it's just gonna tell you that it's gonna return you an element ID of wall type, or it's gonna return you a boolean whether this property is set to true or false and so on. But you have to learn how to use both, and oftentimes you will jump between them. All right, we're jumping all over the place, but there's really a lot I wanna cover. Let's go back to the wall class and kinda focus now on the methods and properties. Because here, I feel like you already know enough. But we're gonna go and have a look. We're gonna go to methods. You will also notice that sometimes you have this kind of pull-down menus here. Before I click on it, I'm just gonna scroll on the right and you'll see that there is 1, 2, 3, there are 5 different create methods. And if you're gonna click here on the scroll, it's gonna only isolate this, what's inside of this kind of pull-down menu of create method. Now you can see all these 5 methods here. But also you can kind of click here and find whatever you want. Again, if you want a wall methods, you look here. If you want to have like element methods or something which is related to walls, then you can scroll here. And sometimes it's good to kind of just Control F and write something like, is there like a wall type something? And you will scroll through and there's nothing in methods. Then you will go to properties, do it again. And you will find here, oh, there's actually a wall type here, which I can use. Now let's look inside properties. I want to look for the specific maybe scale property of a view. You'll also notice that sometimes you'll find the same property across different classes. You can read the description, and here the scale of the view, multiplier for vectors, real number for the scale of transformation, and so on. You can see sometimes you need to click a few times until you find it. In this case, I know it's from the view, so I click here. When you deal with properties, in the beginning it's all the same. You can also see from which class it comes. And right here you can see, most important, get and set. In properties in C#, get means that it's a readable value, means that we can actually get it and kind of get the value. Set means that it's a writable value, means that we can take the scale, write equals, and provide the value. And to know which kind of type of element you need to set or you get from this property, you need to look right here. In C#, in the beginning, you define the type hinting of your methods or properties. In this case, it's an integer. Then you define the name of the property or method, which is scale. And then in here you can see whether you can get and set it, right? Read and write it. But in case of methods, I'm just gonna click on duplicate. You'll see that here you're gonna have different arguments. And right here it's also gonna say that this method is gonna return you element ID. All right, now let's go back to the scale because I haven't finished. Now, I'm just gonna open Revit Python shell in Revit on another screen and bring the console right here. I'm just gonna quickly show you that, look, we can get the view from doc active view, and we can look at this property later on. And then to get any value, I'll just write print view and provide the name of the property. Then we click on run, and I can see the scale is 100, so it's 1 to 100. Now, if I wanna set it, what I would do is I would copy this view scale, and I would put it here. View scale equals, let's make it 50. Now, it's not gonna work because when I'm gonna click on the run, you'll notice that I'm gonna get an error. But don't worry, because when you're gonna read it, it's just gonna tell you, attempt to modify the model outside of transaction. This is another Revit API concept, I explained it on the channel. To make any changes in your projects, we need to create a transaction. We need to start it, and we need to commit it. And here we can write change name. In this case, I don't care. So we're gonna have two print statements here. We're gonna have in the beginning, then we're gonna change the scale, then we're gonna print after. Now let's click on run. Now I can see it used to be 100, then we set it to 50, we committed it, and then we printed it, and the new value was 50. This is how we can read and write different values. But also, if you're gonna click in here, you'll notice that sometimes you can only get it. You cannot set the value by using the property, but you can get it, which is also not bad. And you can see that in this case, you would get bounding box UV, which is two-dimensional bounding box. Now let's scroll up, and I'm gonna click here something like detail level. Yeah, that would be good. In here, have a look. We have detail level property. And here you can see we can get it and we can set it. But this property is gonna return you a type of view detail level. I'm gonna open it, but not gonna look yet. And it means that when you're gonna get it, you're gonna get this kind of type of object. But also when you're gonna set it, you need to use the same one. And in this case, it's a view detail level enumeration. Enumeration means that it's an object which contains all the values inside of it. It's like a pull-down menu where you click on it and you choose from available options. You cannot introduce anything new. Now, to use this kind of thing, let's have a look. I'm gonna zoom out and we're gonna open this console again. I'm gonna continue working here. All right, I'm just gonna drop a few comments so we can start separating it a bit. Now, we don't need to do anything about the scale. We focus on view detail level. Now, let's define here detail level, and we need to take a view. As you remember, we need to provide this detail level property, right? Now we can print detail level. Now we can also print the type of this detail level. We don't need transaction yet, but we're gonna use it in just a moment. Let's comment it out. Now, when I'm gonna click on it, you can see. At first I get medium, because this class has string representation in the console. But if I'm gonna print the type, you'll see that this is view detail level. And what it means is that when you wanna set a new value, so it's medium at the moment, But if I would just take this view detail level, paste it here, and then write it equals to, I need to assign a value with the same type. Since it's an enumeration, I just use the name of this enumeration, then I can choose one of the values inside of it. In this case, we can take, for example, fine. This is how you use enumerations. This is also very common, for example, if you're gonna write built-in category, and inside you're gonna see all of these built-in categories which you can use. And by the way, in Revit Python shell, there is no autocomplete here on the top, but there is here on the bottom, and sometimes I use it to find the right name. Now, if I'm also gonna add here print statement to see it after we set it, you'll see that first it prints something about medium, and then it's gonna set it to fine. This is how we can read and write different properties. Now, let's go and have a look at the methods. This time, maybe we're gonna have a look at the wall class. Let's go to its methods, and I'm gonna go to the create method. Now, in here, I'm just gonna select something random, for example, that one, and you'll see, when you work with methods, this is the most important thing, because you need to know all the arguments you need to provide and what are their types. In here, you can see, this is the create method, which will return you an element with a type of wall. It's not referring here that it comes from the wall, it's referred right here on the top. This method comes from wall class, but right here it tells you what is being returned. If it's a boolean, it would say here, for example, boolean, in this case it's a wall. Then there are 4 arguments. There's document, curve, level ID, and structural. And it's also very important the order of them. And the reason we have so many different create methods is because we actually can provide different number of arguments. And then we're going to be using different kind of subset of this method. For example, the last one in here, we have control for defining the height, the offset, the flip, the structural, level ID, the type, curve, and document, the most of them. Here it's a little bit easier. It says we're going to use default wall style and so on. Whenever you work with methods and you're not sure what you need to provide or you need some kind of insight, you can scroll down. There's going to be parameters kind of menu. With orange, it's going to be all the parameters defined, then the respective class that you need to provide. For example, in here, it's a system double, which means Python float. Here's the boolean and so on. Here's a little description. Change which side of the wall is considered to be inside or outside. Specify if the wall is structural in nature and so on. Then here again, you will see if successful, a new wall object within the project will be returned. But we can also see it right here. This is important. And then if you're lucky, again, you're gonna get examples, and same as before, just gonna copy this, open ChatGPT, and I'm not gonna even write anything because we already asked it for translation. So if we're gonna send the snippet, it will do the same thing. Right now you can see define create wall, define point start, and create a line, kind of define the offset and height, and we can use it. I'm not gonna copy it to see if it works. I know it's gonna be fine, but you would need to use transaction, use this function, and so on. I'll just close it. This is it about the methods. All right, so by now, this is the most that you need to take out of this lesson. You know how to navigate, you know a bit about properties, methods, inheritance, and this is very important. This is the most used stuff. Then you will also find that there are different constructors, events, operators, interfaces, and I'm just gonna briefly go into this. Let's start with the constructor, and filtered element collector is the best class and it's also the most used one. This class is used to search, filter, and iterate through a set of elements inside the project. So you have a Revit project, which is like a database, and if you want to get specific elements, you need to use filtered element collector class. You'd provide, I want to get all walls of this height, or maybe this and that, and then it's gonna find it. But to use it, we need an instance of filtered element collector, and it doesn't exist on its own. Instead, we need to open it, and you'll see there is a new tab constructor. Constructors are used to create an instance of the same class. So in this case, instance of filtered element collector. Because it has so many different methods, we can get elements of class, of category, different filters like excluding, first element. But to use it, we need an instance of it. And this is why we have constructor. We need to build it first. And here there are 3 different versions. We can provide a document, we can provide document and element ID, and document and iCollection of element IDs. I'm gonna click on it, same as methods, you will see to create a filtered element collector, you take sort of the name of filtered element collector, then you would provide document and view ID. And this is how you create an instance of filtered element collector. It doesn't say anything in the beginning, like type hinting, because constructor already relates to the class itself. So if you see a constructor, this is how you create this kind of class. Now, the next thing I want to show you is the operators. I'm going to go to XYZ class. This is something that you don't really need to see, but if you find it, it's good to have a look. Again, it has constructors, methods, operators, properties. In constructor, the same. This is how you create a point yourself. You either use XYZ without arguments or provide free numbers. But in operators, it tells you what's gonna happen if you're gonna sort of take point and add it to another point. In this case, we would look at addition. It has a weird syntax, but it's gonna return you an XYZ element. We're using operator plus, and on the left of the plus sign is gonna be XYZ class, on the right is also. And it's just gonna add two specified vectors. This one is gonna divide specified vectors. By multiplying, there are different options. You can either multiply a specific number by first providing the value, or first provide this one. To be honest, you don't have to really go to documentation to search for operators. But if you see that a class has one, it's just good to have that, oh, I can actually add, divide, and multiply my points with numbers and other points, which is great. You can learn what it does afterwards. Now, this is about the operators. Not so important, but this is okay. The next thing I want to talk about is interfaces, and it's going to be like selection filter interface. This is more advanced stuff, and there are not so many of them, but out of them, I find that selection filter is the most used one, because it allows you to filter what can be selected. You will see that they have this key icon right here. They always start with I selection filter, I error handler, I whatever. And it means that this is a blueprint for your class. So an interface provides the ability to filter object during the selection. So right here is an example, and I'm just gonna translate it to Python so it's easier to explain to you. All right, I'm just gonna paste it here. In here with Python, you can see that to use selection filter, we need to create our own class and inherit everything from selection filter because it has a built-in functionality. And then inside of this selection filter interface, if I'm gonna go to methods, there are two methods, allow element and reference. And tells you that you need to override this pre-filter method to specify elements. It means that when you work with interfaces, you have to create your own class, inherit everything from that interface, and then have a look what can you override, because there are built-in methods and properties which you can interact with. You can also add any methods and properties you want if you know how to work with classes, but these are the special ones which have special meaning. So in allow element, there is an argument of element, we would make some test, and in this case we'll check if element category name is equal mass, then we're gonna return true. And then we'll be able to create this filter and apply in different kind of methods. In this case, I'm also gonna show you, just so you know. Right here is the selection class, there's methods, and if we're gonna look, for example, pick objects, you can just pick objects, or you can also introduce this selection filter. When you're gonna see and that you need argument like this, means that you need to create your own class based on this interface. And lastly, there's also like events and a few other things, but I'm not gonna go that deep anymore. I think I covered already all the basics enough. All right, and that was pretty much about using Revit API documentation. I also promised you in the beginning that I'm gonna compare these two websites. So let's do that right now. I'm gonna put it on the side. The first main difference you see is that on the left, it's not just made for Revit. There's also Navisworks, Grasshopper, and Rhino. I don't work in them, so I'm gonna skip it. Let's go to Revit one, and overall, it's quite identical. I'm gonna open the wall class here. Let's open it right there, and we're gonna open wall class right here. It has very similar structure, but there's little differences. Like for example, here it's written namespace, blah, blah, blah. In here, it's written on the top. There's also gonna be description and so on. In syntax, you're gonna have only C#. In here, you also have Visual Basic and C++, but to be honest, we don't need it. Same remarks, same examples. Again, examples only gonna be in C#, here it's gonna be in more. And same thing with inheritance, but it actually looks nicer here. And this is what's the same. There are a few differences on this website. First of all, you might notice there's this heart icon. I can click on it and I will add it to the favorite. And right here, I can see what I added. So I can remove it, add it. I can add here a bunch of different classes that I need. Honestly, never used it, but it's here if you want to. Now inside, let's go and have a look at one of the methods. I'm gonna open create method. And then there is the second feature, which is called search. It's quite nice in theory because you're gonna click on it and it's gonna search the internet for how to use it. The problem is I never had successful finds with this APIDocs code search. Because in here it found the create in the comment. Doesn't make any sense for me. In here it shows me there's a word create in reference plane, then there is a function create shared parameters. I'm trying to create a wall. There is not a single example here and so on. So this is not ideal, However, instead of that, I use another website which is called python.hotexamples.com. There's also c#hotexamples.com. If you look for something specific, like for example, filtered element collector, click on search. That's going to be fine because it will see there's filtered element in PyRevitDB, in RPVDB, and so on. So it sees that this kind of class exists in many different libraries. You just need to choose which one. And sometimes it's worth to go through many of them. But also sometimes when we look for methods like create, you cannot just write here create. We don't know how many libraries use this word create. Instead of that, you can write here Autodesk, Revit, DB, wall, create. Because this is where it comes from. Now I'm gonna click on search. There's gonna be lots of ads here, I'm sorry for that, but right here you can see Autodesk Revit DB wall create examples. I click on it, and right here there are a few examples. Here somebody using the Dynamo, obviously. Here's how they use this wall create. Here's another one. Again, right here you can click on the project, it's gonna open you GitHub where it's located, and this one is gonna open you the file. I find it much better than using this code search on this website. And also another difference, which I actually forgot to mention, right here on the side, you can see all different versions. There's 2023, and then you see this difference. Let's say I want to compare 2023 and 2021. It's going to open it together and it's going to highlight different things in red and green. Honestly, I never used it. I just discovered it while I was preparing for this lesson accidentally. It looks interesting, but I'm not sure if I'm going to use it. But in the regular Revit API documentation, you'll notice that we have this kind of highlights here. I'm right now in element properties and says that it was updated in 23, 21, and 19. Let's go for a class like filter string rule. And you'll notice that. Have a look. It wasn't changed in 23, it was changed in 21, 22, and so on. I'm gonna go to constructors. You'll see that this constructor is missing in 21, 20, 19, but it exists in 2022. If I'm gonna go to 2022, you'll notice that there is actually this constructor 2 times. Let me make it bigger. Right here you can see that it's actually used 2 times, and you'll notice that one of them was obsolete. So it used to take 4 arguments, but now it takes only 3 arguments, starting from 2022 and onwards. And this will help you understand when you use different methods, properties, classes, constructors, you will understand if they exist across all versions, if there are any changes. Now I can see it was updated in 2023. Interesting. I click on that, and what was updated is they removed the previous version. So it doesn't exist in 2023, but there's usually a gap year where you have the old version, which is marked here, obsolete attribute, and maybe removed future, and also the new one. And this is important because sometimes we have to write the code and account for different Revit versions. This is how we do it in Revit 2021. This is how we do it in Revit 2023. Alright guys, and that's pretty much everything I wanted to teach you about Revit API documentation. I hope that you found it useful, you learned how to work with different classes, methods, properties, what you need to pay attention to. Maybe you even learned a little bit about C# and type hinting. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and I strongly recommend you to check this Revit API Beginner's Guide, which is absolutely for free, and there's a ton of value in it. And I hope to see you in the next videos, and as always, I wish you happy coding, and huge thanks to all my supporters. Goodbye.